Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, and career development podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and with me is my esteemed colleague, as always, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing very well, Dr. Dave. How are you doing?
Most excellent. And for those of you who are listening, you probably don't know. For those of you who are viewing, you do know. We do have a guest speaker with us today. We have Jeni Yelton with us today. And Jeni, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Absolutely. So, my background is in learning and development, but it's interesting. My passion, and I like the idea of journey, a different kind of journey, because my passion is purpose. And I worked in HR and training and development for most of my career. I love helping people and engaging with people. I got my degree in HR, but knew that organizational development, making people be better was what I was really loved. In fact, most people would say, what do you do? And instead of saying, I'd say a corporate trainer, they'd say, oh, well, what do you train? I'm like, I don't really train anything. I encourage, I inspire, I engage people to learn and change. And so I went out on my own and joined an organization called Kairos, and we're certified in Maxwell, but the core of my piece of bring what I bring to Kairos is this purpose-driven idea and purpose-driven professionally and personally, and a different way to look at purpose that makes it more tangible for people. So that's kind of where I start, because I think the first question that most people ask about it is, and I'm sure you probably have had this, like, what is purpose? Like, how do you guys define purpose when you think about someone says, "Are you doing your purpose?"
I think that's a great segue into the topic for today, and that's a tangible view of purpose. Wow, that was a
Yeah,
great,
yeah.
great way. So, why don't you share your thoughts on the tangible view of purpose, Jeni?
Okay, okay. And then I would love to hear what you guys have to say too, because I
Yeah.
want to hear how
Okay.
you guys visualize it too. So one of the things I think is difficult for most people is that there's this part of us that wants to feel like we're here for something, that we weren't just uh, cosmically like thrown into the universe, that something, there's a reason for us being here. And so you have a lot of people say, I want to be here for a purpose. I want my life to mean something. The problem with that is it's such a big, heavy word, and it's really hard for people to define. And so they get into some ideas. Sometimes, if you're kind of in that more religious sector, you can start thinking about, why was I created? If you're more, not maybe religious, you could still think of what's the point? Why am I here? And I think it's difficult for you to just isolate an answer to that. And so it always feels like we're always searching. And the reality is purpose in itself is not that complicated, because everything has a purpose. We were talking about headsets. This headset and microphone has a
Mhm.
purpose. It has a function. Your monitor, your visual cue, your pen, everything has purpose. But I actually think that there's a different levels of purpose. So instead of just saying, I'm achieving my purpose, you should know that you have different levels, and those tangible levels can be measured. So I'd love to go through this to explain it using going to Starbucks or any coffee shop. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah.
If we
Yeah.
do, okay. All right.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a great way to show the different levels and how they're tangible. So we're going out to coffee, and Dr. Joe, this might happen for us real soon. So we're out to coffee. We walk into Starbucks together, and we go up, and there's three baristas standing behind the counter, and we're curious souls. We're learners. So the first thing we do is we ask the first barista, why are you working here? What are you doing here? And they look at you with, that look and say, because I make money. It's a job. I get paid. I don't mind it. I get paid well. People tip. People tend to be somewhat nice, but really it's about, the hours work for me. I'm going to school. It's a job. I like doing it.
Right.
That's not bad. That to me is that first level of purpose. And I kind of
Mhm.
use Maslow's hierarchy of needs progression. That's that safety and security. I know that I'm going to get something tangible for myself in that role. And that is my reason for being there. That's an exchange. I work, you pay me. It's equal exchange. That's level one. You kind of need that. That next level of purpose, we walk to the next person and we say, oh, okay, why do you work here? And that person says to you, they say, you know what? I love it here. I love the smell of coffee. My best friend got me the job here. The customers are always so friendly and nice. And the culture is great. I mean, it's a real supportive, fun culture, and we do a lot of fun things together. And I believe in my staff. My company believes in me. I just love being here. That's second level of purpose, and that's relationship. And so I feel like most companies and organizations, that's what they're striving for. They're striving for people to feel like they belong in an organization, to feel like they are part of something bigger than just themselves. But their satisfaction comes from the relationships they have. It's still about them. It's how they feel about who they work with and the culture they're in and their opportunities and the joy of what they do. But it all comes down to that relationship and connection piece of it. That's great. And most companies are driven to achieve that level of purpose. The problem with that level of purpose is if one thing changes in that dynamic, it makes somebody feel like they're not supposed to be there and their purpose no longer feels right. So let's say that suddenly their best friend leaves, or a new manager comes along, or instead of coffee, now they're selling tea and they really want you to push tea instead, or they change their mixes, whatever it could be. If something in the environment changes, it impacts them. They think different about the value and the fulfillment of being there and getting their purpose. And all of a sudden, where they felt like they were really living their purpose, they're now questioning that purpose because it's the location, the culture, the connection, the relationships that have changed. So really, they aren't living their purpose.
Okay.
So we go to the last barista at the end and we say to the last barista, okay, why are you here? Why do you work here? And that barista looks at you and says, I build businesses. And we kind of look at each other and we think, okay, well, you build businesses. What do you mean? Most new business relationships start in a coffee shop. They sit down, they meet for the first time, they talk to each other. That's where a lot of first connections start. The interesting thing about it is this barista is never going to see the impact. They just know that that's what they're doing. They just know that that fulfillment, they're serving something beyond themselves. Level one and level two are important. I don't want to discount level one and level two, but that level three is knowing that what I'm doing is making an impact beyond myself. I may never feel it, I may never see it, but I know I'm doing something more than just for myself. I'm in service beyond myself. That's the three levels of purpose. So I try to help organizations if they're at level one and they feel like their employees are just being there to get paid. That's where you have employee stealing things. That's where you have employees that conflicts that arise. That's where you have a lot of struggles and challenges. I try to get them to at least that level two. But if I can get that level twos to level three, then you can have shifts in the culture, but people still know that they're meant there because they're in it, they're beyond themselves, not just what impacts them. If I can get them to that level three, then they feel always fulfilled no matter what tasks they're doing because they know they can align those tasks to a bigger picture. So they're not as temperamental when there's changes around them. So that's how I look at those three levels. And to define that third level, you have to really look within yourself, like who are you? And I've got, what do you value? And who do you want to serve? There's some questions and things to really talk through with that. So what do you guys think about my way of explaining purpose?
No, I think that's spot on. I haven't looked at it that way, but everything you said made total sense, because I think we've all been at that first level. So myself, I can say I was at that first level when I was in the military and I was going to school, because they were, I had the GI Bill, so they were paying for me to go to school, and so that part was met by that level of commitment on me and the military. Getting to that second level is where once I started to get my education and I started to move forward, that's when I started to shift to that second level where I was, I knew my purpose was to help other people, to be an example, to help them along the way. And that even led to why me and Dave do the podcast. And we've said this on many of our episodes in the past that for all 160 something episodes that we've put out there, if one person walks away with something or gains something, then we've done our job. We've done what we set out to do. But getting to that third level, like you said, is the challenge. But I also believe uh, that's what I'm doing currently, because that's again helping people achieve that themselves. Because again, we can take them, to the trough or to the water, and it's up to them to drink. And so helping, and that's what it was for me, that light bulb going off. And I knew, people told me all along, get to this level, and you'll be satisfied. But I couldn't experience it, until I did it myself. People could tell me all day, but it wasn't until I start to see that in myself. And now that's what I look for in other people, for them to realize it themselves. Like you said, that critical, help them do that critical self-reflection, help them think about, okay, where am I trying to go? How am I going to get there? And once they start thinking about that, then that level of commitment changes, or that level of purpose changes. And I know that's where I am today. You talked about, going to school to get your HR degree and things like that. And it's funny because when I first went down the path, so most of my degrees are IT, and even my doctorate was going to be in IT. But then I realized I wanted to help people. I wanted to help organizations, and that's why I switched over to organizational leadership. So yeah, kind of like you said, I had an idea of what that looked like, but I had other intentions in mind, or other sense of purpose. So that's kind of my, again, I think yours was much better. Mine was kind of all over the place in the explanation, but I could relate to everything you said. I wish maybe I need to create some type of scenario like that so I could explain it better.
No, I think that's great. And I use the coffee one because it's probably the most transparent for people.
Right.
But you could really use, I mean, I did a workshop with a manufacturer of food. They were a food manufacturer and they process bacon, really good bacon.
Mhm.
And I did a workshop with them on purpose. And I like to use where people can relate, but I did
Mhm.
do it with working manufacturing bacon, like, the idea, the same transition of levels. I think the key of it is that self-fulfillment, and if I'm sticking with Maslow and that idea of self-actualization, is the most unachievable, right? It's at that very top. And I think it's the need that holds people back, is never feeling that fulfillment and that need. Because if you feel that need of um, self-actualization, or feel that need of something bigger than yourself, I think it can transcend other challenges and things that happen in your life.
Mhm.
Um, so that when you're struggling with other core needs in who you are, you can always kind of bounce back to that. Like, I know that I know what I'm doing is right. So I know I'm serving the right people. I know where I'm going. And I think it can drive you towards making better decisions, or making decisions that are more aligned to your purpose. In fact, I think I did share that with you, David, when we met. I always ask myself before I make some decisions, what's your objective? And if that objective doesn't align to my purpose, I try not to do it. I would love to say I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
do it, but that would be inauthentic. Sometimes, you're
Yeah.
like, no, it doesn't align, but that level one and level two, I need to get paid, and
Right.
I like people. So maybe I'll go this way for now. So sometimes you have to kind of adjust it. So what do you think, Dr. Dave?
Yeah, I want to echo everything that Joe said. I mean, that's really how Joe and I met, was that trying to find that purpose and fulfill that purpose. And for me, I reached out to Joe because we've mentioned this in other episodes. Joe and I are both prior military enlisted that have a terminal degree, and that's a very small number of individuals within the military and veterans environment, and even smaller nationally. And, you know, it gives us a different perspective because we've been on both sides if you want to think about it that way. You know, we went in without an education. I mean, we went to high school, but I mean, no formal college education, and you know, we learned things through the long, painful, scenic route. And you know, when I met Joe, I wanted to understand his experiences and share my experiences and see how they aligned or didn't align, to see, you know, could we learn something from each other. And we've learned a lot from each other, but we also realize we have a lot of similarities, uncannily so. And you know, we talked for hundreds of hours and realized we need to do something with this. And Joe wound up being as a guest speaker on a podcast. And afterwards, he said, it was really cool. We should think about that. And we talked about it for like a year. And then we're like, okay, so how do we do a podcast? And we're like, I don't know, we're doctors, we'll figure it out. So it took us another couple of months to figure it out because we wanted everything to be perfect, you know. And we're like, we gotta have the right lighting, the right backgrounds, the right screens, we gotta brand everything. It's like we just got wrapped around the axle. So, you know, we started, and you know, the first couple ones weren't that good, and we found our niche and our groove, and this was it. Our purpose was to share our experiences. Our initial purpose was to share our experiences with other people. And then when we realized we've been talking for close to a year and a half about our experiences, we thought about having guest speakers come on so they could share their experiences. And it really changed our purpose and the purpose of the podcast to be a lot less focused on us and more focused on other people helping other people. So we're helping other people to
Yeah.
help other people is what we're doing with this podcast, because there are so many different perspectives. We've had male and female CEOs. We've had people of all backgrounds and creeds and color, and just to have that dynamic perspective out there, I believe is helping other people find their purpose. Because Joe and I
Mm.
are in a pretty good spot. We've got a pretty good understanding what our purpose is. We've got a couple of purposes, and to be able to help other people find their purpose and understand where they're at, how we can help them, how others can help them. That's the big thing for us, you know.
Yeah, and I think you guys, that's so when I think about how do I define my purpose, I think of that first is like, what are my natural gifts? What am I naturally good at? What are my my skills and abilities? Because I think that in service of others, who I want to serve, I have to think about what do I bring to the table that brings that level of service? What am I comfortable with? What do I excel at? So, you know, you can use all sorts of different ways to assess that. I use like a disc, but I've used
Mm.
strength finders, I've used MBTI, anything that really kind of identifies where your strengths are. And it's funny, even on like, well, on strength finders, I don't know if you guys have a lot of experience with
Yeah,
strength finders.
actually
I'm
just did it last week.
did you? Did you?
Yes.
I'm a woo. Mine
Uh,
is woo. My number one strength, woo. So, which and my disc, I'm a high I, like at the very top of the I. So I'm an ID. So what that means is I'm really good at engaging with people, and my strength is being able to read people, understand what they need to hear, and be able to change my message to align to that. That is what because woo is win people over. So to be a high woo means you have to be able to m- manage your messaging and your interactions to get
right.
people to hear the words. So just like you said, Dr. Joe, about having just if one person is impacted and does something different,
Right.
that's the same thing as a woo that I feel. If I can just like get one person to see their potential, if I can get one person to recognize what they deserve, I can get just them to see their opportunities, to see their potential and what's within them. And if I can just get that person, and that's where my woo really comes into place, where my influence, which is the high I, comes into place is that I'm extroverted. So I have no problem thinking broad, big picture,
Mm.
and looking at opportunities to engage with a lot of people. The interesting part about that is that's what my strengths are. So that's what I can lean into to be able to serve others. If my if I was a little different, so let's say in my disc profile, my strength was more in the, let's say S, which is more empathetic, people driven, but more about teams and cultures and really kind of engaging with people. A lot of people in education, especially in elementary education, a lot of nurses, a lot of people that are very big into helping others as the core of who they are fall into that S area. So if I was more in that S area, then my way would maybe be more working in a nursing home, or working more in very individual states of being able to engage and interact with somebody. If I was more in another area like a C, where I was very concise and I liked details, then maybe structured tasking and coaching on implementation, or getting people to deliver on results would be in that D. So every different profile has a strength. It's just, how do you utilize that strength towards what you are trying to achieve in servicing others? And then the other side of it I look at your values. And what are your core values? What gets you up in the morning and drives you to achieve? And I take a very hard, serious look at values, and I think you'll get this as with a military background, because that's my son right now. I don't know if I shared this with you, is in the Navy. He's actually in boot camp right now.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I know. And I got the first letter home, and it was a little heartbreaking.
Yeah,
And
those
I
are the best
know,
ones.
I know, it was awful. And being the mom, I'm like, I said, I'm driving to Chicago. I'm busting him out of that joint, you know? And I know that
And
that's not the answer, right? And I know that that's part of the process, right? To
yeah,
break him down, to get him
yeah,
to detach. I know that. I know he just has to get through that. But they do that because they're trying to get you to focus on like what your values are. They're trying to shift your
yeah,
values, and they're trying to get you to value loyalty. They're trying to get you to
yeah.
value your brotherhood or sisterhood and
Right.
the
Yeah.
family, your direct family, whatever it may be, because you may have had different values when you were at home. So the purpose of boot camp is to kind of break that value cycle that you already have and condition new values. But then when you got out, your values probably changed, because I think your values change. My number one value, and this always makes me sound bad, as when my kids were little, was financial freedom. And it
Mm.
wasn't about being rich. I mean, I would be okay with being rich, just so you know, just in case you feel like, giving away some money. I'm fine with being rich, but it was not about being rich. It was about making sure that I could provide for my family. I could provide for my family. I didn't have to ask others for help. And that independence, financial freedom was my driving value when my kids were little. So I worked a lot, worked 3 jobs, went to school, just in the beginning, went to school so that I had an education to provide more.
Yeah.
Now that my kids are all grown, I look at education and learning as growth internally, as a growth for myself, not
Yeah.
as a financial aspect. My values have shifted to where financial freedom still in that top, like 3 or 4. But I think like living a purpose, being authentic, creativity, that's now rising up on my
Mm.
list of values. And one of the things I challenge people with is when I say, what's your number one value? I have them go through the whole list. And a lot of times people say, well, love or family or honesty. They'll say those things. And I'm like, that's great. But for it to be your number one, are you willing to sacrifice it for other things? And they're like, no, no, no. And I'm like, then it's your number one. But if you ever sacrifice your number one for other things, then is it really your number one? And you
Right.
have to kind of challenge yourself, because values do shift. So those are the basic aspects. Who do you serve? What do you value? What drives and motivates you? And then where's your strength? Where's your skills? What do you bring that's unique? And every person is unique. I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why we constantly talk about doing the critical self reflection, because you're right. your values change. From when my kids were younger, my main goal was to make sure they had everything they need so that they could be successful. Now that they're out in the world and they're successful, I have grandkids now and they're doing great. Now that my values have shifted, and the financial freedom is definitely one of those I think about all the time, because now I don't have those other responsibilities. But when you talk, like you said, the military, so I spent almost 35 years in the military, and so 2/3 of my life was spent, living that life of the values of the military. So I'm gonna say, honestly, I did not know what to do once I retired. I was really lost because I had given so much of my life to those values, to that purpose. And so I struggled for probably 6 months where I just did not know what I was supposed to be doing. And so you're
Yeah.
right, those values change. And that's why, again, we almost every episode we talk about the self reflection. You have to, because everything changes. So you have to be in a position where you're going to change with it. If not, you're going to be left behind. Those are some of the conversations I have with people, that are thinking about what's next in their life. Is, you
Yeah.
have to really look at what happens if things change tomorrow. Are you prepared to move forward? Are you prepared to move on? And a lot of times they're like, what do you mean? And one of the main things that people think about is that financial security, a job and things like that. And that's the one question I always ask people, if they haven't advanced themselves, if they haven't learned new skills or new trades. And I always ask them, what happens if you and all of your 500, 600 peers are laid off tomorrow?
Right.
What's going to separate you from your peers? What's going to,
Right.
make you stand out over all those other people that are in the workforce or are looking for jobs just like you? So you're right. Our values change. And you talk about strength finders. I was surprised, and I don't know if this happened to you, but I did it 3 years ago. And, my high five are totally different than they were 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it goes back to, who are you serving? What message are you sending out there? And at that time, I was in a different position, different role as I am today. And so
Right.
it's those value or those strengths now align with the purpose or what I was doing at that time. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That because again, my peers, theirs were very similar, which
Right.
just might have meant that they were kind of still doing the same thing or in alignment with what they were doing in the past. But I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, we've got a
Yeah.
couple minutes left, so just to give us our little
Yeah,
ringing the
that's
bell.
I could talk about this stuff. I love this topic. And so I think that's actually Dr. Day, did you want to add anything to that or before I just
I
kind of
was just going to add to what Joe was saying that, um, when I talk to my clients and when Joe and I talk to our clients, we also ask them, what are you doing to impact tomorrow? So because after you reflect on yourself, you need to make some conscious decisions about what you're going to do today to impact tomorrow and tomorrow to impact the next day. So you're not just stagnant. Um, so to kind of round out the podcast, Jeni, what are some of your final thoughts that you'd like to leave with the audience and the listeners and viewers?
So the final thoughts I want to leave for just kind of this topic is that your purpose and it should not be totally aligned to your career identity. It needs to go beyond that. I think that's where it becomes hard when you transition, when you lose a job and you try to find another job and everything. If you really have your purpose defined, you can find a way to fulfill your purpose in many different roles and many different opportunities. It opens your mind and you're feeling less stuck, especially when changes like job changes happen and your identity is so tied to that's where come Dr. Joe, you were struggling. A
Mhm.
lot of people struggle. So
Yeah.
being prepared and thinking about that and thinking about what you want to do is something that, is really good to talk with somebody. You guys have some clients and that's really kind of what we do in Kairos. We look at succession planning at Kairos. So we look at organizations that, look at opportunities for development succession planning, but we also look at individuals' succession and transformation plans, as they're also thinking about their next phase, whether it's, next phase to a different career or next phase within leadership or next phase to retire. We want to really sit down with them and really identify what that path looks like so that they understand that it's beyond the title, it's beyond the paycheck, it's beyond the company or culture that they're in. So they're beyond level one, beyond level two. Really, what kind of impact and legacy do they want to leave beyond that? That's what drives me every day. And here's the last point, Dave. I promise the last point. It is about a journey, but you got to make turns. And that's what my book is that I'm finishing up, is just make a turn, take a challenge, take a risk, because there's a lot of people stuck in that middle lane, just in neutral, just cruising on down, nothing changes. And it's because they haven't taken those turns. And that's where you're not living a purpose at all. You got to make a turn. So
excellent. I really, really like your final message. I mean, there's a lot in that to unpack too, as well. I mean, and it's not a topic that you can just like, dust a few things away and it's done. There's a lot that goes into this and that you can unpack. Joe, what are your final thoughts?
I think Jeni did a great job of the analogy with helping people understand those three levels of purpose, because she said it definitely better than I did, but it's well worth remembering, and hopefully people will jot that down and have a better understanding of that. And I do like the journey piece, and again, that's why we titled the podcast Journeys of Not So Ordinary People, because we all are on a journey. Me and Dave are on our own journeys today. We're on a journey together with the podcast and other things we're doing. So just helping people understand that it's not you go down the straight path, that there are going to be barriers, roadblocks, detours. You're going to have to go way out of the way to get back to the same place. So just having people understand that. And then the last piece of that critical self-reflection, that just always taking a look at where you are, where you're trying to go. So again, thanks for being on the podcast and sharing your perspective about purpose.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up the show or the podcast. So we'd like to thank Jeni for taking time out of your busy day to meet with us and to be on the podcast. Joe and I could talk about this topic with you for hours and hours, and maybe you two will, because you're practically neighbors, it seems like. So yeah, I got a little podcast guest envy going on.
we'll have to do that coffee shop thing, Dr. Joe. It'll be nice.
Yeah.
We'll ask them all too. Let's see what they come up with as answers.
Okay.
So with that, we'd like to thank our viewers and listeners for joining us for another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, career development podcast. If you'd like to reach out to Jeni for her services, to connect with her on LinkedIn, chat, whatever, her information will be in the description. And until next time, we want you to keep on being your not so ordinary you.